I'm assuming Main Street Capital is a stock not a lot of people have heard of. However, I'm going to do a video on it because its performance is quite unique. You do not see a stock like this every day. So we can see the dividend is crazy high, 7.5% yield per year. We'll look at that in depth a little bit later, but also we can see over the last 5 years, the stock has beat inflation. Inflation's been about 22% over the last 5 years, and this is particularly one of the highest inflationary periods in U.S. history, but still, we're beating it. And then actually, if we zoom out, it's actually much better than that. Since it IPO'd around 2007, it is up 270%. And also the 5-year chart is at a high. If you bought almost every single time after, the beginning of 2020, after COVID, you would have bought at probably cheaper prices unless you bought at these couple peaks right here, and then right now, of course. But other than that, you would be up probably more than 27%, and then getting the 7.5% dividend yield. And now let's look a little bit more in depth at that. First, let's look quickly at the PE. PE is low wherever it's at. Right here, PE is 10, Ford PE is 13, so Ford PE is a little bit lower, but it's still basically the same level, and that is a very cheap PE. But you would expect it for a stock that's primarily dividend, also one that has a market cap around 5. We're going to look at the dividend and then talk about the market cap specifically. This is actually the earnings per share, which is fine. That's not primarily what I'm wanting to look at. I want to look at the dividend because the dividend is extreme. It really is. It's been very well. So we can see every year since 2016, except for 2020, which 2020 was COVID. Shouldn't be too surprising. They've had a quote-unquote special dividend, and that I'm assuming is just the extra money they make in that year. Other than that, they seem to hike it around 2%, right? It was 2.22, went 23, and then went back up to almost the same level, 2.59, a little bit higher in 2022. And then we had a really good special dividend last year, and this year we're expecting it as well. So you can probably expect it at the very low, very minimum with no special. There's a bad year, you can expect 5% yield, but probably you can expect much more than that. Closer to 7.5 we're getting this year. And you'd probably expect something similar for next year as well. So this is a stock that, like I said, is maintaining, beating inflation, and giving you a 7.5% yield. The biggest worry I'm assuming if you don't know what they do, let's look a little bit at what they do and then talk about their size, because I think both are intertwined. They do basically investing in smaller companies. Not like crazy small, but pretty small. I mean, we can see, if you want to read this entire thing, I'm not going to do it, but firm typically invest in lower middle market companies with 10 million to 150 million in revenue. It prefers investing in a range between 5 and 100 million. So they do basically investment in companies, and then they're making money off that. So they're an investment firm. They're in capital markets, but it's much different than something like a Morgan Stanley, right? Although they do some of that, a lot of that is also wealth management of other people's. It seems like they primarily do investing into companies that are smaller than them, and they've done very, very well on that. I mean, like we see, up 270% over the last 10 years, or actually more than that since it IPO'd in 2007. So, geez, that's forever ago. That's almost 20 years at this point. But yeah, I think the fact that this company is small, this is the biggest risk I see with it. Well, one being, if they have a particularly poor investment, that could weigh on them for a dividend that year. If there's a market downturn as well, companies aren't doing as well, you're probably going to not have that 7.5%. You can probably expect closer to 4 or 5. And also, it's a small company. And if they make some poor decisions, 2 or 3 really poor investments in a row, this company could really suffer. That's your biggest risk. You have higher risk to return, not only because this is a smaller company, but because of the specific industry they're in. However, if this is not a huge portion of your portfolio, if this is going into a dividend portfolio, one that either is aiming to get about 7.5% and not necessarily trying to, or 5, 6, 7%, not necessarily trying to match or beat inflation. This one does well. If it does match and beat inflation and give you 7.5% for the next decade or plus, that's amazing. We hope for that, but we don't 100% count on it. And I wouldn't hold a large portion of my portfolio in this, but I would have it as a part of a dividend portfolio. I also think it could go in one where you're expecting to match inflation, because historically this has actually outperformed. Let's just say match inflation, and then get this dividend and maybe have it as one of your higher dividends and not, maybe balance it out with one that you're going to have more guaranteed share growth. But I like this stock. I do. I think it should do fine in the long run. I just think it's a bit riskier. I mean, you have such a high upside with the share price and the dividend. It makes sense that, okay, this would be a bit riskier. So I wouldn't have a large percentage of my wealth. I don't know. I mean, if you have a very small portfolio, a couple, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 dollars, which it's not an insignificant amount of money, but it's not a crazy amount. Of course, you can have a decent percentage of your wealth in it then. But if I had any serious amount of wealth, I wouldn't be putting 1 or 2% of my wealth into it, even though that's not a crazy amount. 1% probably isn't going to kill you. I just feel like this is a higher risk. But if it was a part of a dividend portfolio of 30, 40, 50 stocks, this could fit right into that. And maybe even if it made up 1% of the portfolio, that's fine then. As long as you're decently diversified, then I think you should be fine. I like this stock. I think it should do well. I wanted to point this out. 7.5% dividend yield on top of matching inflation with share price doesn't come around every day. Of course, do your own research. This is not investment advice, but I thought this was a cool one. If you guys enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you left a like or subscribe. I hope to catch you next time.